The moment my father called me a thief, the entire room went silent. Not the polite kind of silence. The heavy kind. The kind where 30 people suddenly stop chewing turkey and stare at you like you just robbed a bank. My daughter stole from her grandfather, my dad said, standing at the head of the Thanksgiving table like he was announcing the halftime score at a football game. My mom sat beside him, already crying. Of course she was crying, that was always part of the show. And then he slid a white envelope across the table toward me. Slowly. Dramatically. Like he'd practiced the move in front of a mirror. Every pair of eyes in that room followed the envelope until it stopped right in front of my plate. "This," my father said, loud enough for the entire living room to hear. "'S proof." I looked down at it. Then I looked back at him. And I smiled. Not because it was funny, because 4 months earlier I had hired someone whose entire job was to follow money and uncover lies. And what she found didn't just clear my name, it destroyed everything my parents had been building behind my back for years. But to explain that I need to take you back. 8 months earlier, to the week my grandfather died. My name is Olivia Carter. I'm 32. I'm a registered nurse living in Savannah, Georgia, and for most of my life I believed my family was normal. Not perfect, just normal. My grandfather, Walter Carter, was the one who raised me half the time when I was growing up. He lived in a little white house outside a town called Brookfield, population barely 4,000, the kind of place where everyone knows what truck you drive, and where your mom went to high school. When I was a kid, Grandpa Walter taught me how to fish on Saturday mornings at Lake Lawson. We'd sit on the dock with a thermos of coffee and cheap gas station donuts while he told stories about Vietnam, baseball, and the one time he almost got arrested for driving a tractor down Main Street during a parade. He called me Livy. Nobody else was allowed to call me that. Just him. When I got accepted into nursing school, he mailed me a birthday card with a $50 check inside. On the memo line he wrote, "Proud of you, Livy." But the last 3 years of his life, he stopped answering my calls. At first I thought he was just getting older, then I thought maybe he was mad about something. I sent letters, birthday cards, photos from work, a Christmas package one year with his favorite pecan cookies. Nothing came back, no calls, no replies, just silence, and that silence ate at me, because my grandfather had never ignored me before, not once. When he died, it happened fast. Pneumonia, 84 years old. The hospital called my dad on a Tuesday morning. I drove 3 hours from Savannah to Brookfield after a 12-hour shift. The funeral was at the same church where I'd gone to Sunday school as a kid. White steeple, wooden pews. The same pastor who baptized me when I was 8, my father, Gerald Carter, stood at the podium and gave a eulogy that could have won an Oscar. Tears. Pauses. His voice cracking at exactly the right moments. "My father was the greatest man I ever knew," he said. People nodded. My mother sniffled loudly in the front row. I sat in the third row. Nobody asked me to move closer. After the service, we gathered in the church hallway where everyone always eats casseroles and awkwardly talks about football scores. That's when my dad dropped the first bomb. He straightened his tie and said casually, "Dad left everything to me. The house, the savings, all of it. Just like that. Nobody questioned it. Not my cousins, not my uncles, not even me. But something about the way he said it felt wrong. Too smooth. Too rehearsed. Like a doctor reading a chart that had already been rewritten. But the truth is, the real problem between me and my parents started years earlier. 10 years earlier, to be exact. I was 22 and fresh out of nursing school, working brutal hospital shifts. Living off frozen burritos and cheap ramen with a roommate. One Sunday night my dad called. "Livy, I need you to come by the house." When I got there, he was sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of paperwork. My mom was next to him. Already crying. "We just need your help," he said. "The bank needs a co-signer on the mortgage. Just temporary." My mom added quickly. 6 months, maybe less. I should have said no. But I didn't. Because they were my parents. And because my mom kept saying, we could lose the house. So I signed. 6 months turned into a year. A year turned into 5. 5 turned into 10. Every time I asked about refinancing, the conversation went exactly the same. Dad, when are you taking my name off the loan? Soon? Soon when? You want your parents homeless, Olivia. And my mom would cry, every single time. What that signature cost me was something nobody warned me about. My credit score tanked. Late mortgage payments I never knew about started appearing on my record, 30 days late, 60 days late, sometimes worse. I found out from a credit alert at 2 in the morning one night. I called him the next day. Things were tight, he said casually. I handled it. Yeah. He handled it with my name. 2 weeks after my grandfather's funeral, I sat my dad down at that same kitchen table. No yelling, no drama, just the truth. Dad, I said, I need my name off that mortgage this year. He leaned back in his chair. Now is not the time, Livy. I just buried my father. I know, I said, but it's been 10 years. His jaw tightened. You want to sue your own parents? I blinked. I didn't say anything about suing. You're thinking it? That night my mom made a bunch of phone calls. I know because within 3 days, 4 different relatives contacted me. My aunt texted, your parents raised you and this is how you repay them. My cousin left a voicemail. Why are you trying to take their house? Everyone had the same version of the story. The one my parents gave them. Olivia is ungrateful. Olivia is threatening her parents. Olivia wants to steal the house. Nobody asked my side. And then my dad called me one last time. His voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. You think you're the only one who can play games? What does that mean? I asked. He paused. Then he said something that didn't make sense at the time. Your grandfather left everything to me. And if you keep pushing, everyone's going to find out what you did with his money. My stomach dropped. I didn't take any money. But he had already started the story. And in a town like Brookfield, once a rumor starts, it doesn't stop. A few days later, I logged into the mortgage account online. I still had access from years earlier. And that's when I saw it. A new loan entry. A home equity withdrawal, $40,000. Taken out 3 months before my grandfather died. My name was on that loan too. My dad had borrowed $40,000 against the housey, using my credit. Without telling me. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot staring at the numbers. He didn't just trap me, he tightened the trap. And that's when the rumors started. Quiet at first. Whispers. My dad telling relatives that I'd been visiting Grandpa Walter alone near the end. That cash had gone missing from a dresser drawer. That nobody knew where it went. But he had suspicions. Suspicions with my name attached. In a small town, you don't need proof. Just a story. And slowly, my father was turning me into the villain. Then one afternoon I drove to the county courthouse. And what I found there changed everything. Because the will my father filed after my grandfather died looked real, except for one small problem. The signature at the bottom wasn't my grandfather's. And the moment I realized that, I opened my phone and searched for 3 words, forensic accountant near me. The first thing I noticed when I stepped back inside my parents' house was the silence. Not normal silence. Not the cozy kind after a big meal when everyone's half asleep on the couch. No. This was the kind of silence where 30 people are pretending not to stare at you, while absolutely staring at you. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor as I walked back into the dining room. Every single head turned. My mom stood at the head of the table like a queen who had just exposed a traitor. And in her hand, that stupid velvet jewelry box. My stomach twisted. Oh, good. Mom said sweetly. Olivia's back. My cousin Paige leaned over to whisper loudly to someone. I mean, if she didn't take it, why'd she run outside? A couple people chuckled awkwardly. My dad crossed his arms. Olivia, he said, voice calm but cold. Your mother asked you a question. I slowly sat back down in my chair. The envelope rested in front of me like it weighed 1,000 pounds. You said you didn't take the necklace. My mom continued, her voice now dripping with disappointment. I didn't, I said. But it disappeared the exact night you were in our bedroom. Because you asked me to grab the guest towels. I reminded her. My Uncle Mark snorted. Convenient. I felt the heat creeping up my neck. God, This felt exactly like high school, when someone would start a rumor and suddenly the whole cafeteria decided you were guilty of something you didn't even understand. My mom opened the jewelry box dramatically. Inside was a diamond necklace, sparkly, delicate, probably worth more than my car. "Your father bought this for me on our 25th anniversary," she said to the table. "And it vanished 3 months ago." Her eyes locked on mine. "Right after Olivia visited." A couple gasps rippled through the room. My chest tightened. 3 months. They'd been sitting on this accusation for 3 months. "You could have asked me," I said quietly. "We wanted to believe it wasn't you." My dad replied. That one hurt. Because he didn't say we know it wasn't you, just that they wanted to believe. My Aunt Cheryl leaned forward like she was watching courtroom drama. "Well, did you search her purse?" "Cheryl," my dad said, half laughing. "But nobody said it was a bad idea." I slowly pushed my chair back from the table. "Go ahead," I said. The room went still. "Search it?" Mom blinked. "Olivia." "No, seriously," I said, grabbing my purse and tossing it onto the table. "Knock yourselves out." My cousin Jake unzipped it like he was defusing a bomb. He pulled things out one by one. Lip gloss, keys, wallet, a crumpled Starbucks receipt, travel size hand sanitizer, a tiny bottle of Advil, nothing else. Jake turned the purse upside down. Nothing fell out. He cleared his throat. "Well, my mom looked irritated now. Like the scene wasn't going how she'd planned. "Maybe she moved it somewhere else," Aunt Cheryl suggested. "Or sold it already," Paige added. I let out a quiet laugh. Not because it was funny. Because the alternative was crying. "You guys really think I stole from my own parents?" I asked. No one answered. That was answer enough. And suddenly, something inside me snapped. All the years of this, the comparisons, the subtle digs, the way my brother Ethan could do no wrong while I was always the difficult one. I slowly picked up the envelope. "Since we're already doing public accusations," I said, my voice steady now, "let's talk about this." My mom's smile returned instantly. "Oh yes," she said. "Please." The room leaned forward. 30 people suddenly very interested. I slid a finger under the seal. My dad cleared his throat. "Before you open that," he said, "we want you to understand this comes from a place of love." That sentence alone told me everything. My heart was pounding now. "What is it?" I asked. My mom exchanged a quick glance with Dad. Then she said it. "We think you should consider paying us back." The words landed like a grenade. "What?" "For the money we invested in you," she continued calmly. My brain struggled to process that sentence. "You mean, raising me?" "No," she said quickly. "For college." I blinked. "You insisted on going to that expensive school in California," Dad added. "You encouraged me to," I said slowly. "Yes, but we didn't realize how ungrateful you'd become." Ungrateful. The word echoed in my head. "I call twice a week," I said. "You didn't come home for Easter." "I had work." "You always have work," Mom snapped. A few relatives nodded. Because apparently working a full-time job in Los Angeles counted as a personal betrayal now. My dad tapped the envelope. "The total amount is listed in there." My fingers felt numb as I pulled the paper out. The number printed on the page made my stomach drop. The 124,000. I looked up slowly. "You're serious?" "We're not asking for it all at once," Mom said reassuringly. "Just monthly payments." Like I was paying off a damn car loan. "This is insane. You also need to understand," Dad continued, "that until this is resolved, we're reconsidering certain things." "What things?" He glanced toward my brother Ethan. Then back to me. "The inheritance." There it was. The real reason. My chest tightened. "So Ethan keeps everything." My brother shifted uncomfortably. "Liv, that's not." "Stay out of it," I snapped. Mom sighed dramatically. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I stared down at the paper again, the $184, and suddenly I started laughing. Not a small laugh, a full, uncontrollable, "What the hell is happening?" laugh. My mom's smile vanished. "What's so funny?" I wiped a tear from my eye. "You guys," I said. "You actually think I need your money?" The room went quiet. My dad frowned. "What does that mean?" I reached back into the envelope. because they hadn't noticed something. There was more than one piece of paper inside, and when I pulled the second document out, my mom's face turned pale, because she recognized the logo at the top instantly. It was from a law firm in Boston, and it had her name on it. I slid it across the table toward her. "You might want to read that first," I said softly. She picked it up slowly. Her eyes scanned the page, then widened. "What is this?" I leaned back in my chair, and for the first time all night I felt calm. "That's the letter your sister's lawyer sent me last month," I said. The room froze, because my Aunt Lisa, Mom's estranged sister, hadn't been mentioned in this family for over 20 years. And apparently, that was about to change everything. "That's the letter your sister's lawyer sent me last month." The second those words left my mouth, the entire room froze. I mean froze. Forks stopped mid-air. My little cousins stopped whispering. Someone's chair creaked loudly and then went completely still. But the person who looked like she'd just seen a ghost. My mom, her fingers were gripping the paper so tightly the edges crumpled. "Where did you get this?" she asked quietly. Too quietly. The kind of quiet that made my skin crawl. I shrugged like it was no big deal and took a sip of my now lukewarm cider. "From a lawyer," I said. "In Boston." My dad leaned over her shoulder. "What lawyer?" he demanded. Mom pulled the paper closer to her chest, like she didn't want anyone else to read it. But it was too late. My cousin Jake had already spotted the letterhead. "Wait," he said slowly. "Is that a probate firm?" That word made several relatives look up. Probate, inheritance, money, the holy trinity of family drama. Mom shot Jake a look sharp enough to slice bread. "It's nothing," she snapped. I laughed again. God, it felt weird how calm I suddenly was. Like something had finally snapped inside me and I just didn't care anymore. "Nothing," I said. "That's interesting." My Aunt Cheryl leaned forward again, practically vibrating with curiosity. "Olivia, honey, what does the letter say?" Mom slammed the paper down on the table. "It's irrelevant." "Is it?" I asked. Dad's jaw tightened. "Olivia," he said, using that warning tone from my childhood. "This isn't the time for games." "Oh no," I replied, leaning back in my chair. "This is exactly the time." Because for the first time tonight, I wasn't the one on trial anymore. I slid the letter back toward the center of the table so everyone could see it. The top line read, and underneath it, regarding the estate of Margaret Bennett. My mom sucked in a sharp breath. Someone across the table whispered, "Who's Margaret?" I answered before Mom could stop me. "My grandmother." That got everyone's attention. Because according to my mom, my grandmother had died with nothing. That's the story we'd heard our entire lives. But the letter said something very different. My cousin Paige grabbed the page and started reading out loud. "This letter serves as formal notice that you have been named a primary beneficiary in the estate of Margaret Bennett." She stopped. Her eyes widened. Estimated total value $6.3 million. The room exploded. $6 million. What the hell? I thought she was broke. Mom shot out of her chair. "Give me that," she snapped. But Paige held the paper up like she was reading gossip headlines. Wait, there's more. I could practically feel my mom's blood pressure rising from across the table. Paige continued reading. "Per the terms of the will, distribution is contingent upon locating all listed heirs including Olivia Carter." Now 30 pairs of eyes swung toward me. My dad blinked. "You?" I gave a little wave. Mom's face had gone ghost white. "That's impossible," she said. "Is it?" I asked. Dad grabbed the paper from Paige and read it himself this time. His expression slowly shifted from confusion to disbelief to something else. "Suspicion. You've been in contact with Lisa?" he asked. There it was. The forbidden name. My Aunt Lisa. The sister my mom hadn't spoken to since before I was born. The sister we were told had betrayed the family. The sister we weren't allowed to ask about. I leaned forward slightly. "She reached out to me on Facebook." Mom's voice cracked like a whip. "You had no right to respond to her." 30 relatives went dead silent again. I tilted my head. "No right. She's manipulative." Mom continued. "She's always been manipulative." "That's funny?" I said softly. Why? Because she said the exact same thing about you. A couple people gasped. Dad's face darkened. Olivia. But I wasn't stopping now, not after tonight. Not after being called a thief in front of half the family. According to Lisa. I continued. Grandma didn't cut you out of the will. Mom's breathing had gotten noticeably faster. She left everything to both of you. I finished. The room went still again. Someone whispered, both of them. Dad looked between us. Then why didn't we hear about this before? I smiled. Slowly, because now we were getting to the good part. Well, I said, tapping the second page inside the envelope. That's where it gets interesting. I slid the document toward him. Dad picked it up. His eyebrows knitted together as he read the first line. Then his face drained of color. Mom noticed instantly. What? She demanded. He didn't answer. He just handed the paper to her. Her eyes moved across the page, and suddenly, her entire body stiffened. No, she whispered. The word barely made it out. Mom, Ethan said. She looked up at me like I had just detonated a bomb in the middle of the room. You went behind my back, she said. I shrugged. You were kind of busy accusing me of grand theft. She ignored the jab. You had no right to sign this. That word caught everyone's attention. Sign. Uncle Mark frowned. Sign what? Mom didn't answer. So I did. It's a financial disclosure. My cousin Jake leaned closer. For what? I met his eyes. For the estate investigation. Now the confusion spread like wildfire. Dad rubbed his forehead. Why would there need to be an investigation? I held his gaze. Because, I said carefully, the lawyers believe some of Grandma's money went missing. Mom slammed her hand on the table. That's ridiculous. But nobody looked convinced anymore. Because the document in her hand said something very specific. Potential misappropriation of estate funds prior to beneficiary notification. Aunt Cheryl blinked. What does that mean? I took a slow breath. It means, I said, the lawyers think someone accessed Grandma's accounts before the will was executed. 30 heads slowly turned toward my mother. She laughed. A loud, forced laugh. Oh please, she said. That's absurd. But the problem. The letter had a date on it, and it was dated 2 months before my grandmother officially passed away. My dad looked up slowly. You visited her in Boston that month. Mom's eyes flashed. So, did you have access to her accounts? He asked. Her voice went ice cold. You're seriously entertaining this. I leaned forward again. Actually, I said quietly. They already confirmed someone logged in. My mom stared at me. And the login location, I continued. Silence. Then I finished the sentence. Was here in Arizona. Now the entire table looked like they'd just watched a car crash happen in slow motion. My dad's voice dropped to a whisper. Claire. Mom shot up from her chair again. This is insane. She snapped. I'm not discussing this in front of everyone. But Uncle Mark folded his arms. No, actually, he said. I'd love to hear this. And for the first time that night, my mother looked like she wasn't in control anymore. I reached into my purse calmly. Because there was one more thing I hadn't shown them yet. A printed bank statement, and when I slid it across the table, my dad's hands started shaking. Because the highlighted line showed a transfer. $240,000, withdrawn from my grandmother's account, 2 months before she died. Transferred to my mom. $240,000. My dad's voice cracked as he stared down at the bank statement. You could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. That's how quiet the room got. My mom didn't sit down. She just stood there at the head of the table, staring at the paper like it had personally offended her. That's not what it looks like, she said flatly. 30 relatives leaned forward at the exact same time, because when someone says that's not what it looks like, it's almost always exactly what it looks like. My cousin Jake broke the silence. Well? He said slowly. What does it look like? Mom shot him a glare. Mind your business. But it was everyone's business now, especially since $6 million had suddenly entered the chat. My dad rubbed his temple like a migraine had just kicked in. Claire? He said carefully. Why is there a transfer from your mother's account To yours 2 months before she passed away. Mom crossed her arms. She gave it to me. That answer hung in the air for a second. Then Uncle Mark let out a laugh. Convenient. Mom snapped her head toward him. You weren't there. No, he said. But apparently Olivia's aunt was. That name again. Lisa. The ghost in the family attic. Mom's jaw tightened. Lisa's a liar. I leaned forward. That's funny, I said again. She turned on me instantly. You really believe a woman you've never even met over your own mother? That question would have crushed me a few years ago. But tonight, after the whole public thief accusation thing, not so much. I believe bank records, I replied calmly. Several relatives murmured agreement. Mom's eyes flashed. She was my mother? She said. She helped me. $240,000 worth of help, Jake muttered. Dad turned the paper toward himself again. Why didn't you tell me about this? Mom hesitated. Just for half a second. But in a room full of people staring at you, half a second feels like an hour. It wasn't important, she said. That answer made Dad sit up straighter. $240,000 wasn't important. Mom threw her hands up. Oh my God, David, are you really doing this right now? Yes, he said. And suddenly his voice sounded very different. Not calm. Not controlled. But hurt. You never mentioned this to me. Mom laughed nervously. It was a private matter between me and my mother. Across the table, Aunt Cheryl raised an eyebrow. Then why didn't she mention it in the will? Boom. Another silence bomb. Because everyone had read the letter now, and the will clearly listed equal distribution between both daughters. No early gifts. No special transfers. Nothing. Mom grabbed her wine glass and took a huge gulp. You're all acting like criminals over a family gift. I tilted my head. Then why are the estate lawyers investigating it? Her eyes snapped to me. You started this. No, I corrected. You did. Then I gestured around the table. You called me a thief in front of 30 people. That shut her up for a second. Dad cleared his throat. Olivia, he said carefully, how did you even get this document? Lisa sent it. Mom laughed again. Oh, of course she did. But her laugh sounded thinner now. Less confident. She's been digging into the estate. I continued. Dad frowned. Why? Because the numbers didn't add up. Jake leaned closer. What numbers? I slid another page out of the envelope. Dad's eyes widened. There's more. Oh yeah, I said. I placed the sheet flat on the table. It was a printed summary from the estate lawyer. 3 lines highlighted in yellow. Expected estate value $300,000. Documented assets at death $660,000. Difference $240,000. The exact amount sitting in my mother's account. My cousin Paige whispered. Oh my God. Mom slammed her hand on the table again. This is ridiculous. But nobody looked convinced anymore. Dad stared at the page, then at her, then back at the page. Claire, he said slowly. She refused to meet his eyes. You told me your mom was struggling financially. She was. Dad tapped the highlighted number. She had over $6 million. Mom's voice shot up an octave. That's not the point. Oh, I think it is. Uncle Mark said. My mom whipped around toward him. You've always hated me. Mark shrugged. You make it pretty easy. Tension crackled across the table. Dad turned to me again. Why would Lisa send this to you? I answered honestly. Because I'm also listed in the will. That landed like a nuclear blast. What? Multiple people said at once. Mom's chair screeched against the floor as she sat down. You're not, she said. I slid the last page from the envelope, the actual will excerpt. Highlighted again. Primary beneficiaries Claire Bennett and Lisa Bennett. Secondary beneficiary in event of dispute Olivia Carter. Secondary beneficiary. He looked up at me. You? I nodded. Mom shook her head rapidly. No, that's not real. But the law firm's stamp sat right there on the page. Dad turned back to her. Claire, did you know about this? She didn't answer, and that silence told everyone everything. Jake leaned back in his chair. Wait, hold up. All eyes turned to him. If Olivia's the secondary beneficiary, he pointed at the highlighted line. And there's a dispute between the sisters. The realization spread around the table like wildfire. Paige finished the sentence. Then Olivia could inherit the whole thing. The room erupted. Holy crap. $6 million. That's insane. My mom shot up again so fast her chair tipped over. That will is invalid, she snapped. I raised an eyebrow. The estate lawyers disagree. Dad looked between us like his brain was buffering. So if Lisa challenges the transfer? I nodded slowly. The court could reopen the estate. And if they find financial misconduct? I shrugged. Both daughters could be removed as beneficiaries. Dead silence. 30 people processing the same terrifying possibility. My cousin whispered it first. Then Olivia gets everything. My mom looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under her. You planned this? She said. I almost laughed. You think I plan to be accused of stealing your necklace? Her voice dropped to a whisper. You're trying to take my inheritance. I met her eyes calmly. No. Then I leaned forward. You did that all by yourself. Across the table, my dad finally asked the question nobody had dared say out loud yet. Claire, where is the necklace? Mom blinked. What? The one you accused Olivia of stealing. She opened her mouth, closed it, then said something that made the entire room erupt. I might have misplaced it. 30 people exploded at once. You accused her for nothing! Are you serious right now? I just sat there quietly. Because honestly, that wasn't even the biggest bombshell of the night. Not even close. And when my phone suddenly buzzed in my purse, I pulled it out. Lisa's name flashed across the screen. Incoming call. I looked up at the table full of stunned relatives. Then answered. Hi? Aunt Lisa. Her voice came through the speaker. And the first thing she said made my heart drop straight into my stomach. Olivia, the lawyers just found another transfer. Every head at the table snapped toward me. I swallowed. How much? There was a pause. Then she said the number, and across the table, my mother stopped breathing. $780,000. $780,000. For a moment I thought I'd heard Aunt Lisa wrong. Maybe the line crackled. Maybe she said 78, or 17, but no. She repeated it. 780,000. Olivia. The room was so quiet I could hear her voice echoing from my phone speaker. 30 relatives stared at me like I'd just announced the world was ending. Across the table, my mother looked like someone had drained every drop of blood out of her body. My dad leaned forward slowly. What did she say? I didn't answer him. I was still staring at Mom. Lisa. I said carefully into the phone, can you repeat that? Another transfer, she said. From Grandma's account. 3 weeks before she passed. I swallowed. How much? You heard me. Bar 780,000. Someone at the far end of the table whispered. Holy hell. My cousin Jake looked like his brain had short-circuited. Wait, so that's over $1 million total. Everyone turned toward my mother again. Her mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. That's impossible, she said, but her voice sounded thin, like she didn't even believe it herself. My dad stood up. Claire. He said slowly, is there something you need to tell me? She shook her head quickly. No. I lifted the phone again. Liza, where did the money go? A pause. Then she answered. That's the strange part. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? The first transfer went to Claire's account, she said. Everyone looked at my mom again. But the second one, another pause, went somewhere else. Now the confusion returned. Where? I asked. Lisa sighed on the other end of the line. That's what the lawyers are trying to figure out. Mom suddenly slammed her hand on the table. This is harassment. I almost laughed. Harassment. You're digging through private financial records? Actually. Lisa's voice came through the speaker calmly. They're estate records. Mom froze. And suddenly, she looked nervous. Real nervous. Dad caught it too. You said Grandma gave you the money, he said slowly. She did. Then why wasn't it documented? Mom snapped. Because not every family conversation requires paperwork. Uncle Mark leaned back in his chair. $6 million usually does. Several relatives nodded. My mom looked around the room like she was suddenly realizing something terrifying. The room wasn't on her side anymore. Not tonight. I could practically see the shift happening. Earlier, they'd been watching me like I was the criminal. Now, they were staring at her. Judging, calculating. Dad ran a hand through his hair. "Lisa," he said toward the phone. "What exactly are the lawyers saying?" "They're saying," Lisa replied, "that both transfers happened while Grandma was in hospice." A murmur spread across the table. Hospice. End of life care. Vulnerable. Legal red flags everywhere. Dad's voice dropped lower. "Was she conscious?" Another pause. Then Lisa said the sentence that detonated the room. "No." My dad blinked. "What?" The hospice nurse documented that Grandma was heavily sedated those weeks. 30 jaws practically hit the table. Mom's chair scraped loudly as she stood again. "That's a lie." Lisa stayed calm. "It's in the medical report." "You don't know what you're talking about." "Claire," Lisa said gently, "I have the records." My mom grabbed her wine glass and downed the rest in one gulp. Then she pointed at my phone. "This is exactly what she wants." "What?" I asked. "To tear this family apart." That accusation hung there for a second. Then Uncle Mark snorted. "Pretty sure you handled that part yourself." Mom shot him a murderous glare. Dad leaned on the table now, staring directly at her. "Did you take the money?" Her head snapped toward him. "I told you, Claire." His voice was sharper now. Stronger. "Did you take it?" For the first time all night, my mom hesitated. Just long enough for every person in that room to notice. Then she said something that made the entire situation even worse. "It was temporary." The room erupted. "Who borrowed it?" "From your dying mother." Mom raised her hands defensively. "I was going to put it back." My dad looked like someone had punched him. "You took over $1 million. I needed it." "For what?" he demanded. She didn't answer. That silence was loud. Jake leaned forward again. "You spent $1 million and nobody noticed." Mom glared at him. "Stay out of this." But Jake wasn't wrong. Because now everyone was thinking the same thing. "Where the hell did the money go?" Dad asked it out loud. "Claire, what did you do with it?" Her jaw clenched. "Business investments." Aunt Cheryl blinked. "You don't have a business?" Mom hesitated. Then she muttered something that made my stomach drop. "I was helping Ethan." The entire room turned toward my brother. Ethan froze mid-sip of his drink. "What?" Mom pointed at him. "His startup." Jake frowned. "You mean that crypto thing?" Ethan turned pale. "That was only like 50,000, he said quickly. Mom's eyes widened slightly. "Oops. She just said too much." My dad caught it immediately. 50,000. Ethan shifted in his chair. "Well, yeah." Dad looked back at Mom. "You said business investments." She crossed her arms again. "There were other opportunities." "Like what?" Silence. And suddenly, a memory clicked in my brain. Something Ethan said last Christmas. About Vegas. About a big opportunity. I leaned forward slowly. "Mom." Her eyes snapped to mine. "Did you gamble it?" Her face went completely blank. And in that moment I knew. Jake whispered the word everyone was thinking. "Oh my God." Dad staggered back like he'd been hit. "You didn't." Mom shook her head quickly. "No." But she wouldn't meet anyone's eyes now. Which, honestly, was answer enough. I felt my chest tighten. "You stole money from your dying mother." My voice came out quieter than I expected. "And blew it in Vegas." Mom finally exploded. "I was trying to grow it?" The room went silent again. Because that sentence sounded even worse out loud. Dad stared at her like he didn't recognize her anymore. "How much did you lose?" She didn't answer. "Claire." Another pause. Then she whispered it. "Most of it." Aunt Cheryl gasped. "Jesus." Jake leaned back in his chair. "So let me get this straight." He counted on his fingers. "You took $1 million from Grandma's account." "Jakey?" "Lost it gambling." "Jakey." "Oh." "And then accused Olivia of stealing your necklace to distract everyone." That last part landed like a nuclear blast. Because suddenly, the entire table realized something horrifying. The necklace accusation. The public humiliation. The envelope. The timing. It wasn't random. It was a distraction. My dad's voice came out hoarse. Claire. She didn't look at him. You tried to frame our daughter. And suddenly, my mom started crying. Real tears. Real panic. Because for the first time tonight, she wasn't controlling the narrative anymore. But the real shock came when my brother Ethan suddenly stood up. Okay, he said loudly. Every head turned toward him. He looked pale, shaky, and terrified. Mom didn't gamble all of it. The room froze again. Dad frowned. What do you mean? Ethan looked at me. Then at the table. Then back at Mom. And when he spoke again, he dropped the biggest bomb of the night. I did. For a second, I honestly thought Ethan was joking. Like maybe this was his weird attempt at diffusing the tension, because my brother had always been the golden child. The straight-A student. The one who got MVP at the high school football championship, and still had time to volunteer at church on Sundays. The kid my mom used to point at and say, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" But now he was standing there in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner, looking like a guy who just confessed to arson. My dad blinked slowly. You did what? Ethan swallowed hard. I lost the money. The room exploded. What? You lost how much? You gambled too. My mom jumped in immediately. Ethan, sit down, she snapped. But he shook his head. No. And that one word told me something I'd never seen before. Ethan wasn't afraid of Mom tonight. My dad stared at him like he'd just grown a second head. You lost $780,000. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. Yeah. The entire table erupted into chaos. My cousin Jake actually stood up. Are you kidding me right now? Aunt Cheryl slapped her hand over her mouth. Oh my God. My mom grabbed Ethan's arm. Stop talking. But Ethan pulled away. No. His voice cracked, but he kept going. Mom's not lying. She took the money to help me. I stared at him. You asked her for $1 million. No, he said quickly. It wasn't like that. Dad looked ready to faint. Then what was it like? Ethan paced a few steps beside the table, running both hands through his hair. You remember the startup I was working on? Jake snorted. You mean Cryptobra 420? Ethan shot him a look. It had a real name. Yeah, Jake said. Nobody else remembers it. Ethan ignored him and looked at Dad. It was supposed to be a huge opportunity. Dad folded his arms. So you stole your grandmother's money to invest in it? I didn't steal it. Mom jumped in again. She didn't steal anything. But nobody at that table was buying that anymore. I leaned forward. So where did the money go, Ethan? He hesitated, and in that pause, I suddenly remembered something. 2 years ago, spring break, Instagram photos. Ethan standing next to a Lamborghini in Las Vegas. Caption, big moves coming soon. My stomach twisted. You didn't just invest it, I said slowly. He didn't answer. Which meant I was right. Jake groaned. Oh my God, you went full Wolf of Wall Street. Ethan looked defensive. It wasn't gambling. Vegas? Jake said. Pretty sure that's gambling. It was trading. That's literally gambling with a laptop. My dad slammed his hand on the table. The room went silent. He pointed at Ethan. You took $780,000 from your dying grandmother. I didn't know she was dying yet. You invested it in crypto? Yes. And you lost it? Ethan looked at the floor. Yes. Dad rubbed his face slowly like he was trying to wake up from a nightmare. And the other $240,000? He asked quietly. Mom shifted in her chair. That was separate. Separate how? Silence again. I suddenly felt sick. Because I knew that look on my mom's face. That was the look she got when she was about to lie. Or worse. Tell the truth, she finally sighed. I used it to pay off Ethan's debt. Another explosion around the table. D-beat? He was in debt already. Jake threw his hands in the air. This family needs a Netflix documentary. Ethan groaned. Jake, shut up. But Jake wasn't wrong. Because suddenly the math was starting to add up in a horrifying way. 780,000 lost trading. 240,000 paying off debt. Total missing money. $1,020,000. Gone, just gone. My dad looked like someone had just told him the house burned down. You ruined your grandmother's estate, he said quietly. Mom shook her head quickly. It's not ruined. Dad stared at her. There's $1 million missing. We can fix it. How? That question hung in the air. Mom's eyes slowly drifted toward me, and suddenly every muscle in my body went rigid. Because I knew exactly what she was thinking. Oh no, I said. Mom leaned forward. Olivia, you're listed as the secondary beneficiary. I laughed in disbelief. You cannot be serious. If the estate dispute goes to court, you think I'm giving you the money? I'm asking you to help your family. That word hit me like a slap. Family. The same family that had just accused me of stealing jewelry in front of 30 people. The same family that had sent me an envelope demanding 184,000. Jake leaned over and whispered loudly, "Wow, the audacity is impressive." Mom ignored him. Olivia, if the court removes Lisa and me as beneficiaries, you think I'm handing you $6 million after tonight? I'm your mother. And you called me a thief. Her voice rose. You embarrassed me. I actually laughed. Why you embarrassed? Wow. The room had gone dead silent again. Dad looked between us. Claire, stop. But Mom wasn't stopping. Olivia, if you don't cooperate. What? Her eyes narrowed. You'll destroy this family. I stood up slowly. My chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. You already did that. For the first time all night, Mom looked unsure of herself. Like she wasn't used to me pushing back. But I wasn't done. Not even close. You accused me of stealing your necklace. You had access to it? You tried to make 30 people believe I was a criminal. I was protecting our family. By framing your daughter. Mom didn't your daughter. Dad looked at her again. Claire. Then he asked the question nobody had circled back to yet. Where is the necklace? Mom froze. Jake leaned forward again. Oh yeah, the original crime. Everyone waited. Mom shifted uncomfortably. I told you, she said quietly. I misplaced it. I tilted my head. Did you? She didn't respond. Which meant she was lying again. And suddenly a horrifying thought popped into my head. Mom. Her eyes flicked toward me. Did you sell it? Her face went pale. Jake whispered, holy crap. Because that necklace. Everyone knew it was worth a fortune. My dad's anniversary gift, 25 years of marriage. A huge diamond centerpiece. Dad's voice came out barely audible. Claire. She started crying again. I needed liquidity. The room exploded for the 100th time that night. You sell IT? For Vegas? For Han. My dad looked like he might collapse. That necklace was my anniversary gift to you. Mom covered her face. I was going to buy it back? With what money? Jake muttered, but nobody laughed this time. Because now the damage was undeniable. The stolen inheritance, the missing million, the sold necklace, the false accusation, all of it. And right in the middle of that silence, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Lisa. I opened it. And what I read made my stomach flip, because the estate lawyers had just sent her something new. Something huge. I looked up slowly at the table. Ooh, guys. 30 heads turned toward me. The lawyers just found the Vegas records. Jake leaned forward. Oh, this is getting good. I shook my head. No. My voice came out quieter than I expected. It's worse than we thought. Dad frowned. How? I looked at Ethan. Then at Mom. Then back at the phone. And when I finally said the number, even Jake stopped smiling. 2 million. 2 million. The number dropped into the room like a bowling ball through glass. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the kids at the end of the table had gone quiet, sensing something huge had just happened. My dad stared at me like he was waiting for me to laugh and say just kidding. 2 million what? He asked slowly. I looked down at my phone again, hoping I'd somehow read the message wrong, but it was still there. Transfer records attached. Total confirmed losses 247,000. My throat went dry. $2 million. I repeated. My cousin Jake blinked. From Vegas? I nodded. And suddenly Ethan's chair scraped loudly across the floor. No. He said immediately. Everyone turned toward him. That's not right. I held up the phone. It's what the casino records say. Ethan shook his head, pacing now. No, that's impossible. I never had that much. My mom stood up too, panic flooding her face. That's wrong, they're wrong. But my phone buzzed again. Another message from Lisa. 3 wire transfers traced to the Bellagio and area accounts. Dates attached. Jake leaned over my shoulder. Oh my God. My dad looked like someone had knocked the air out of him. Claire. Mom looked cornered now, like a deer caught in headlights. You said it was 1 million. Dad continued. It was. Then why are there records for 2? She didn't answer, which told everyone exactly what they needed to know. My Uncle Mark leaned back slowly. Jesus Christ. Paige whispered, how does someone even lose $2 million? Jake answered immediately. Very aggressively. Nobody laughed. Dad turned to Ethan. You told us you lost $700,000. Ethan looked like he might throw up. That's all I took. Dad's voice hardened. Then where did the rest come from? Ethan froze. Because now the math didn't make sense. $780,000 from him. $240 from Mom, that was just over $1 million. But the casino record said 2. Which meant another $1 million had come from somewhere. And suddenly every eye in the room slowly turned toward my mother again. Her breathing had gotten shallow. Claire. Dad said quietly. Tell me you didn't. She shook her head quickly. No. But her eyes were glossy, and that tiny crack in her voice. Yeah, that told us everything. You took more, Dad said. It wasn't like that? How was it? Mom slammed both hands on the table. I was trying to fix it. The room erupted again. Fix Nukath. You gambled more to win it back. Jake rubbed his face. Oh my God, she doubled down. Mom pointed at him. You don't understand how these things work. Jake stared at her. You mean gambling? Dad looked ready to collapse. You stole money from your dying mother. Mom snapped. I was going to replace it. Manitiet. Dad shouted. Silence slammed into the room again, because that was the problem. There was no answer. No way to replace $2 million. No way to hide it anymore. No way to pretend tonight hadn't just exposed everything. My mom's shoulders started shaking. I thought I could win it back, she whispered. No one said anything, because honestly, what do you even say to that? My cousin Paige finally broke the silence. So you stole $2 million from Grandma. Mom flinched. Lost it in Vegas. Another flinch. Sold your necklace. Mom covered her face. And then blamed Olivia. That last part hit like a hammer. Because suddenly the entire table looked back at me. The girl they'd just spent half the night side, eyeing like a criminal. Jake sighed. Well, this is awkward. My dad slowly sat down. He looked 20 years older than he had an hour ago. Claire, he said quietly. She didn't respond. Look at me. She lowered her hands. Tears streaked down her cheeks. You accused our daughter of theft, he continued. She had access. You framed her. I was desperate. That's not an excuse. It is when the estate lawyers start asking questions. There it was. The truth. She hadn't accused me because she believed I stole the necklace. She accused me because she needed a distraction. Someone else for the family to focus on, someone else to take the spotlight. Me. My dad's voice came out colder than I'd ever heard it. You tried to sacrifice your own daughter to cover up your gambling. Mom started crying harder. I didn't think it would go this far. Jake muttered. You literally called a family trial at Thanksgiving. She ignored him. Then suddenly, my brother Ethan spoke again. But this time his voice sounded different, smaller. It's worse than that. Everyone turned to him. He looked pale. Ethan, Dad said. Ethan swallowed. There's something else. My stomach dropped. Because the words something else were the last thing this night needed. What? I asked. Ethan rubbed his hands together nervously. The lawyers, they're not just looking at Grandma's accounts. Jake frowned. Then what? Ethan looked at Mom. Then at Dad. Then finally at me. And when he spoke again, the entire room stopped breathing. They're investigating Dad's company too. My dad blinked. What? Ethan pointed weakly at Mom. She used the company account to move some of the money. Dad stood up so fast his chair fell over. Hat. Mom looked horrified now. Ethan. You said it was temporary. Dad's face had gone completely white. My business account. It was just a transfer. Claire, that's corporate fraud. 30 relatives sat frozen in their seats. Because suddenly this wasn't just family drama anymore. This was prison-level drama. My dad stared at her like he'd never seen her before. You used my company to hide stolen money. Mom's lips trembled. I thought I could fix it before anyone noticed. Dad laughed. But it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh people make when their entire life just imploded. You might have just destroyed my business. Mom collapsed back into her chair. I didn't mean to. But the damage was already done. 2 million gone, a missing necklace. A stolen inheritance. A corporate account tied to the transfers. And 30 witnesses sitting around the table hearing every word. Jake leaned back slowly. Well, Thanksgiving just got federal. No one argued. Because at that exact moment, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Lisa, but this one was different. Shorter. Just one sentence. I read it. Then looked up at the table full of stunned relatives. They've officially filed the lawsuit, I said. My mom's head snapped up. What? I swallowed. Against you. The room went completely silent, and then I read the rest of the message out loud. Grand theft. Financial exploitation. And fraud. My mom's face went gray, because suddenly, this wasn't just family drama anymore. It was criminal. I'm being sued. My mom's voice came out like a whisper that had been dragged across broken glass. Nobody answered her. Because technically, she wasn't just being sued. She was being investigated for crimes that could put her in prison, and every single person sitting around that Thanksgiving table knew it. The room that had been loud and chaotic all night suddenly felt hollow. Like the air had been sucked out of it. My dad stood there frozen beside his fallen chair, staring at Mom like he was looking at a stranger wearing her face. You used my company account, he said slowly. It wasn't even a question anymore. Mom wiped her face with shaking hands. I was going to fix it. Dad laughed again. That same broken laugh. You keep saying that. I just needed time. You stole $2 million. I didn't steal it. Claire, he said quietly, you transferred money from your dying mother's account into a corporate account you had no legal access to. Silence. Then he finished the sentence. That's theft. My mom's shoulders collapsed. Across the table, my cousin Jake exhaled slowly. Well, he muttered, this escalated quickly. Nobody told him to shut up this time. Because honestly, he wasn't wrong. 3 hours ago this night started with turkey, football on the TV, and my aunt arguing about cranberry sauce recipes. Now, it looked like the opening scene of a courtroom drama. My phone buzzed again in my hand. Lisa had sent another message. The estate lawyers want to speak to you tomorrow. I stared at the screen for a second. Then locked the phone. Because right now, the conversation in this room mattered more. My dad finally looked at me. Really looked at me. Like he was seeing something he hadn't noticed before. Olivia, he said quietly. I waited, he swallowed. I owe you an apology. The words hung in the air. 30 relatives watching. My mom still crying. Ethan sitting there looking like his life had just collapsed. And my dad, the man who had always been calm and controlled, standing there looking genuinely ashamed. You trusted her over me, I said. It wasn't angry, just factual. He nodded slowly. I did. Another pause. I'm sorry. A weird ache settled in my chest. Because the apology mattered. But it didn't erase the moment earlier when 30 people had stared at me like I was a criminal. When my own mother had held up that jewelry box like evidence in a trial. When that envelope had been shoved in front of me. Like I owed them money just for existing. My mom suddenly spoke again, her voice small now. Olivia, please? I looked at her. Don't do this. Don't do what? Turn the family against me. I actually laughed a little. You did that yourself. Her eyes filled with fresh tears. You're going to help them destroy me. No? I said calmly. I'm going to tell the truth. She shook her head desperately. If the court gives you the estate, I didn't answer. Because yeah, that possibility had crossed my mind. $6 million. Life-changing money. Money that technically could become mine. but something about the way she said it made my stomach twist. "You think this is about the money?" I ask. "You could end up with everything." "That's not the point." Jake leaned back in his chair. "Pretty sure the point is $2 million missing." My mom ignored him. "Olivia, please," she whispered again. "You're my daughter." The irony of that sentence almost made me laugh again. Because about 3 hours ago, I'd been her daughter when she needed someone to blame. Now I was her daughter because she needed someone to save her. Funny how that worked. I took a slow breath. Then said something that made the entire table go quiet again. "I'm not taking the money." Jake sat up straight. "Wait, what?" Dad frowned. "What do you mean?" I picked up the will document still sitting on the table. The highlighted line. Secondary beneficiary Olivia Carter. $6 million waiting at the end of a legal battle. I slid the paper back toward the center of the table. "If the court removes you and Aunt Lisa as beneficiaries," I said, looking at Mom, "the estate goes into trust." Everyone blinked. Even Jake. "What?" I shrugged. "I already talked to the lawyers." Mom stared at me. "You what?" "I asked them to write a clause." Dad frowned. "What clause?" I met his eyes. "If the inheritance comes to me, it gets donated." The entire room went silent again. Jake looked like someone had unplugged his brain. "Donated where?" I shrugged. "Veterans housing programs, medical research, hospice care." The word hospice made my mom flinch. "Why would you do that?" she asked. I held her gaze. "Because Grandma spent her last weeks in hospice." Silence. "And apparently," I added quietly, "that's the only place the money should have gone." No one spoke for a long time. My dad slowly lowered himself into his chair. Jake rubbed his face. "Well, that's the most savage moral high ground I've ever seen." Paige whispered. "She just nuked the entire inheritance." My mom looked like she'd been slapped. "You'd throw away $6 million just to punish me?" I shook my head. "No." Then I stood up. "I'd give it away because it was never mine to fight over in the first place." I grabbed my coat from the back of my chair. Around me, relatives were still sitting there processing everything. The missing money, the lawsuit, the inheritance, the fact that Thanksgiving dinner had turned into a full-blown family collapse. My dad spoke again as I headed for the door. "Olivia?" I turned. He looked exhausted, but sincere. "I'm proud of you." For a second, my chest tightened. Then I nodded once. "Thanks." Behind him, my mom was still crying. Ethan stared at the table. Jake whispered something to Paige about needing 3 drinks and therapy. And suddenly the whole scene felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life play out. I opened the front door. Cold November air rushed in. I stepped onto the porch, the quiet night wrapping around me like a blanket. Inside, voices started rising again. Arguments. Panic. The sound of a family trying to put itself back together after everything had just fallen apart. I walked to my car slowly. Sat in the driver's seat. And for the first time all night I exhaled. Because sometimes the truth doesn't just reveal secrets. Sometimes it burns the entire house down. But as I started the engine and pulled away from my childhood home, I realized something strange. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free. And honestly, that was worth more than $6 million.